Hello and welcome to Dialogue. This Tuesday marks 2 years since the latest round of Israel-Palestine conflict began. At the same time, indirect talks between Israeli and Hamas delegations have started in Egypt, aiming to reach a framework for the exchange of hostages and prisoners. How likely is a real breakthrough toward peace? Can Israel and Hamas bridge their deep divisions and long-standing hostility? And what will it take to begin post-conflict reconstruction? Join us for discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Daoud Kuttab, Director General of the Community Media Network, Hussein Askary, Vice Chairman of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, Josef Gregory Mahoney, Professor of Politics at East China Normal University, and Wang Jin, Associate Professor at Northwest University of China. Welcome to the dialogue. So, Mr. Daoud Kuttab, I will start with you. So the talks continued in the second day between Hamas and the Israelis. So what's the focus of the negotiation right now?
Well, they're trying to work out the logistics of the release of an exchange of prisoners between Hamas and Israel. Hamas will be releasing both live and dead prisoners, and also Israel will be releasing Palestinian live and dead prisoners. So they're working out the logistics of the exchange, but also the extent of the Israeli withdrawal and ending of the hostilities, which Israelis have not yet stopped.
So Professor Mahoney, Trump wrote on the social media that the hostage, a prisoner exchange should be completed this week. Is that possible? Is that what the international community expect?
I think it is possible. I think that clearly Hamas has been trying to move in the direction of some sort of ceasefire for some time now. That was certainly something that the Netanyahu government has opposed, including bombing the talks in Qatar that were previously underway. So I think we all realize that the situation in Gaza is one that is fraught with existential crises, with 500,000 people under threat of starvation. And essentially, Hamas has been defeated, and they're being told that if they don't come to the table, if they don't release these prisoners, dead and alive, that they face total annihilation, including potentially the vast majority of the people living in Gaza, given the blockade and the lack of food. So I think that the key point here is that we can expect it to go forward, but I don't think we should be under any illusions. This is not a peace plan. These are terms of surrender.
Terms of surrender. All right. Wang Jin, as also Mr. Daoud Kuttab mentioned, Israelis continued bombing Gaza. What do you make of the situation? At the same time, yes, they are negotiating for the release of exchanges of hostages and prisoners. At the same time, there's pressure goes on. And, what's the next step? Will the talk touch upon something beyond the exchange of prisoners and hostages here?
I think as you mentioned that it's just the beginning phase of the negotiation, rather than the very settlement of or the signature of the kind of agreement for the ceasefire. And so that's why the conflict, from Israeli perspective, that Hamas is still resisting. And the dialogue between Hamas and Israel hasn't reached the kind of the breakthrough, although they had already started in Cairo. So that's why Israel continued their military strikes. And from the Hamas perspective, they may hope to release the Israeli remaining hostages and giving back the bodies of the remaining hostages. But from Hamas perspective, they don't want to dismantle. They don't want to disarm. They don't want to play the marginal or no role in the future the Gaza new local authority. So that's why Hamas have their own conditions. They still want to have their terms in the new possible agreements. So that's why the conflict continues and the ceasefire is still on a process of negotiation. So that's why we should wait and see. But I think maybe the release of hostages, this is not a difficult task. and maybe the ceasefire for a certain time, maybe several weeks or maybe 1 or 2 months is easy. But we were talking about the future, for example, how to organize a new authority in the Gaza Strip, how to restart the construction plan, and how to reopen the channels between Israel and Gaza. These would be the very, very sensitive, but the challenging task and challenging issues in the future between Israel and Hamas, and also mediated by international community.
Ms. Askary, what do you make of the current situation? Do you think the two sides, or anyway involved the parties, let's say Hamas and Israel, they are dealing with probably the most, easy part, exchange of prisoners, hostages, something more challenging ahead, like the role of Hamas and withdrawal of Israeli troops?
Well, I think as the so-called Trump plan stands, everybody, of course, will be relieved if there is a stopping of this destructive war on the Palestinian people, if there is a humanitarian relief coming in and food and medicine to the Palestinian people in Gaza. But it does not really deal with the root causes of the issue. As Professor Mahoney said, this is they gave Hamas a bill of how to surrender. It does not really address the root causes of this problem. I think it's not correct to reduce the whole question to a Hamas-Israel conflict, because before October 7th, there was many decades of the undermining and suppression of the rights of the Palestinian people. There were many issues related to that, and therefore it's without dealing with the real issues about the rights of the Palestinian people in general. It has nothing to do with Hamas in a certain sense. And also establishing a mechanism for peace, because with the kind of statements made by Netanyahu and his people in government, they have no intention of allowing a Palestinian state to be established. There is no permanent peace process going on, and the total neglect of the Palestinian people's rights in having their own state, but also having life and prosperity for their people and for their children. Now, in that context, both the rights of the Palestinian people have to be addressed from the outset. There is some sort of light at the end of the tunnel in this plan, but it does not really so concrete. But in the larger context, there should be a peace process for the whole region to address not only Israel's concerns, but the concerns of all nations in the region, because many other nations have suffered: Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Iraq. We had suffering for many, many decades. So therefore, there should be a larger context for this discussion, and this is one thing which we are working on, is this, the idea of peace through economic development. But besides the rights, the legitimate rights and the UN resolutions concerning Palestine, there should be an international effort to bring peace to this region, but mostly through economic and social development of the people, with focus on rebuilding the infrastructure, water management systems, and connectivity. And I think the Belt and Road Initiative is a fantastic framework for this kind of effort, which we call the Oasis Plan, which is a more comprehensive plan for economic reconstruction, but peace through economic development. This is how you build trust among nations on the long term, not only resolving issues about security today.
Yes, thank you for that. We'll touch upon that later on. Mr. Daoud Kuttab, all right, let's assume, so this week we will, we'll witness the completion of exchanges, prisoners, hostages, and what's next? And do we have a plan? Like, this is the start of the implementation of the 20-point plan. Do we have any specific details on that?
Well, before I answer that question, I want to deal with the word that was mentioned by two of your guests, surrender. I don't think we should call what Hamas has agreed to surrender, because the surrender usually means giving up the equipment. Now, they might be giving up some of the offensive military equipment in the future, but at the present time, there's no specific request that Hamas dismantle its equipment in this phase. So I think, as your question is, the next steps after the exchange of prisoners, the release of hostages, I think there has to be a decision by both Israel to withdraw and by the international community to set up the Palestinian Technocratic Committee that will be managing Gaza in the short term, and to find, as your previous speaker said, the political horizon for Palestinians. You know, as your guest said, October 7th, 2023 was not the beginning of the conflict. It began long, long before that, and it was the explosion because there was no political horizon. So, as item 19 in the 20-point plan, there has to be political considerations for the long term, for the West Bank and Gaza, for the state of Palestine, which 80% of the members of the UN now recognize. I think we need to find that political solution as a way to make sure that this violence does not return from both sides and that there is peace between the state of Palestine and Israel. So it's a long way, and I think one has to be careful about making any predictions. But I think if we can move past the war, then we will be in the position of starting to talk about political horizons.
Daoud, what about the Hamas attitudes right now? You know, they agreed in part with the 20-point plan. At the same time, they didn't talk about, they demand, disarmament and no role in the future governance of Gaza. What do you make of that?
Well, Hamas is an ideological Islamic movement. And so the term surrender is not part of their dictionary. They don't totally surrender, but they have been weakened and they are under a lot of pressure from their fellow Arab countries, especially from Qatar and Turkey, which have been supporting Hamas. So I think they understand that they have to make some adjustments. They already conceded that they don't want to have any role in managing Gaza after the end of the discussions and the negotiations. But the question that is not clear is how committed they are to total military dismantlement, and they've hinted that they are willing to give up offensive weapons, but they think that defensive weapons are necessary because of what happened in Sabra and Shatila when the Palestinian, the PLO military withdrew from Beirut in 1982. Then there was a massacre of the Sabra and Shatila because the people had no one to protect them. So I think there will have to be some type of defensive weapons kept in the Palestinian areas. And Gaza and Hamas said that we will never leave Gaza because we live in Gaza. I mean, Hamas is not the military arm only. Hamas is a political movement. So I consider and I think that Hamas will be more and more talking about a political unification with the PLO and merging or being merged into the Palestinian Liberation Organization in one way or another, and therefore there will be more of a Palestinian representation of all of Palestinians and not Hamas representation. You know, the problem with war and peace decisions, it cannot be done by a faction. It has to be done with the approval of the entire people. And I think that was Hamas's mistake, is that they went to war without having everybody behind them. Now, again, this is now 2 years into the October 7th, but we need to understand that Palestinians have to be involved both in decisions of war and peace.
Professor Mahoney, I'm sure you want to respond to that in terms of the 20-point plan. Go ahead.
Well, let's be clear. I didn't say that Hamas was, accepting the terms of surrender. I said rather that the 20-point plan is effectively the terms of surrender that is being imposed. Whether or not Hamas is able to carry through with that, I do think they'll carry through with releasing the hostages. I don't think we'll see a release of all the Palestinian prisoners, and we probably won't see the release of someone like Marwan Barghouti, who's probably best positioned among Palestinians to pick up the political pieces and maybe move the Palestinian cause forward from the Israeli jail that he currently occupies. If he is released, that would be a step in the right direction, maybe indicating that there is possibly a political solution. But I have my reservations or doubts that that's going to happen. I think the main concern that we have right now is that we all realize that we need to prevent mass starvation and the continued genocide of the Palestinian people. And I think the problem is that we're being told that the only way that we can accommodate that now or achieve that now is to accept a 20-point plan from the United States, which would essentially, by some estimates, make a foreign occupation government with the president of the United States at the head of it, and by several estimates, 15. There are at least 15 reasons why the 20-point plan itself violates international law and international norms. So, if we have to swallow this bitter pill in order to make sure 500,000 people don't die, then maybe that's what we have to do. But where it goes beyond, where we go beyond releasing prisoners and bodies, I think the lesson that we know through time, and we've seen this in country after country, is that when you exercise this amount of destruction, this amount of bloodshed, you create a legacy of violence that lives on intergenerationally. And so we can talk about, all right, maybe we can find a solution for this week, and maybe that'll open the door for a solution next week. But we have really a lot of big problems on the horizon that have to be addressed. I agree with Hussein that we have to have a much more a much bigger solution in mind, and I agree with Daoud that we saw a tactical mistake on behalf of Hamas. But again, on the October 7th attacks, I think that there's still a lot to be discussed around that issue, and this isn't the forum for it. But nevertheless, we don't see any mention of the West Bank. Mm-hmm. We don't see any commitment to the two-state solution. So this is really a dangerous path.
Yeah, speak of that, Professor Mahoney. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Jin he made 3 very important points in terms of the peace plan, in terms of relationship between the Palestinians and Israel. He talked about that the importance of the principle of a Palestinian people governing Palestine, and also the importance of the two-state solution. In that respect, what do you make of this 20-point plan?
For me, I've always been personally committed to the two-state solution. We know that it was first proposed in the UN Security Council in 1967. We know that the U.S. vetoed it up until 1993, when the U.S. helped broker the Oslo Accords, which established a framework for a peace process that was intended to lead to a two-state solution. But it did not constitute a final agreement to create a Palestinian state. It's also neglected, the Oslo Accords also neglected to address the most contentious issues. And it's fair to say that no president, past or present, has ever been committed really fundamentally to a two-state solution, and has always prioritized what it described as Israeli security. Now, I'm afraid, despite my personal commitment and many others' commitment to this two-state solution, that it's always been a noble goal, but it has become increasingly a political fiction. And while fictions can always persist, and while we've seen European capitals increasingly in the past year recognizing a Palestinian state, these recognitions have come precisely when such a state and hopes for the same have been utterly destroyed. So I see nothing in this plan, certainly nothing from the Trump administration or Israeli leadership committed to a two-state solution. Quite the opposite. And again, this is nothing new, and it continues to be the source of tragedy.
Mm-hmm. Wang Jin, as I said, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Jin stressed the importance, the principle of Palestinians governing Palestine. Why is it so important? What's the concern here?
Well, the problem is that the international community is concerning more and more about the possible dismantle of so-called two-state solution, because we know that on the one hand, Israeli military strikes and activities are still ongoing in the Gaza Strip. And also Israel, I think, is trying to establish some kind of a buffer zone inside the Gaza Strip. So this would be very dangerous for the future status of the Gaza Strip. And also, on the other hand, Israel, particularly during the past 2 years after October the 2023, that Israel is establishing more and more Jewish settlements, and the pace is actually upgrading in both East Jerusalem as well as in the West Bank, which are always been defined by the international community as the Palestinian territories. So this is why, also we have to say that on many occasions, Netanyahu and also other right-wing political leaders represents the voices of the majority of the Israeli public that they always reject reject the establishment of the independent Palestinian state. So that's why the two-state solution now faces the kind of possibilities of dismantle. The international community worries about it very much. So against this background, I think China's voices, altogether with other latest moves of the European countries' recognition of Palestine as independent states, or hopes that these kind of international voices, international concerns could be turned into pressure to Israel to be more restrained and to respect the two-state solution direction for the future peace, just and long-term peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So that's why I think it's very timely. I think this kind of 3 points were put forward by Wang Yi could be very representative international voices on the just call for the international settlements and resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian peace.
Ms. Askary, Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it clear that, we don't support a Palestinian state. It is not written in the 20-point plan. So what's the Israeli plan? No Palestinian state in the future?
Well, we have to go back a bit in history to understand where Netanyahu comes from, because in the history of Israel, since the 30s, by the right-wing Zionist, extremists like Jabotinsky, they had a plan, a security plan for Israel called the Iron Wall. And that idea was that there is no way that the Israeli new colonialists will ever coexist with the Arabs. So the only way to make sure that the greater Israel is established is to use brutal, overwhelming military force to break down the will of the Arab people in Palestine, or make them leave, or be subordinate to a greater Israel state where they will be like second-class citizens. And that use of military force has been the doctrine of Israel for decades. And that's where, in July 2023, Netanyahu made a speech in which he evoked this Jabotinsky plan, the Iron Wall, which is a failed Israeli policy because this never brought security to Israel. But the dream of a greater Israel where there are no Arabs or Arabs living under subordinates to the Israelis, to the Jewish people, that this is the plan of the Netanyahu people. Now, there will be no change from within Israel on that. The only way the Israeli policy will change if it's forced from outside to abide by that. One glimpse of hope is that Trump, because of the outcry internationally, and that the fact that the United States is losing its allies in the region, like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, even Qatar now, Turkey, and many other nations, forced Trump to backpedal on his plan to remove the Palestinian people from Gaza, which was Netanyahu's and the Likud party plan, to transfer all Palestinians outside Palestine. And he now says, no, Palestinians should not go back, because he understands, and there are many people around the world and in the United States understand, that what Netanyahu and the Jabotinskyites in Israel are proposing is suicidal for the region, but also suicidal for the Jewish people. Israel, as a result of that policy, the Iron Wall military policy, has become the least safe place for Jews in the world, instead of making it a safe haven for the Jews. And this is the failed policy which everybody in the world, including the United States, have to force Israel to realize, that this policy of forcing the Palestinians out of the Gaza and the West Bank and destroying the nations around Israel will not bring security and peace to the Israeli people or the Jewish people.
Daoud, let's take a look at the situations in Gaza. Recently, there's interception of the global resilient flotilla. 170 activists were detained and then released, including Greta Thunberg. Of course, that highlighted the situation, humanitarian crisis in Gaza. How serious is it? I know UN has confirmed the famine there. Are we receiving, a smooth transportation of humanitarian, help, assistance there?
Well, I think the whole situation in Gaza, as we've been talking, has to be resolved, certainly on the humanitarian level. But what is happening around the world, and I think this attacks or deals with the issue of a Palestinian state, is that there is a huge change among the public. Britain and France did not change their position in recognizing Palestine because they woke up one day changing their mind. Their public is pushing them on that. And I think the recognition of Palestine by 80% of UN members and by 4/5 of the permanent members means that the state of Palestine, as I wrote in my book, State of Palestine Now, is going to take place no matter what happens. And I think what we're seeing in the last few months and even last few weeks is that there's going to be elections in Israel probably in March. And Netanyahu is unlikely to be elected again. People are calling for 60% of Israelis called for his resignation today. On the Palestinian side, the China plan of unity has to come into faction. Our former foreign minister, Nasser Qudwa, has been reinstated back into the PLO and into the Fatah movement. And so there's going to be talks about unity between Hamas and the PLO so that there will be a united PLO front that is negotiating the future of Palestine, both in Gaza and the West Bank. So I don't think that people can reverse the recognition of Palestine. And so there's going to be a huge pressure from the entire world, from half of the Israelis, from half of the Americans, to have some kind of a political solution, two-state solution, some type of a relationship between an independent Palestinian state and whatever borders there will be. It has to happen. Unless it happens, we will be back talking about violence again, and nobody wants to talk about violence anymore. People want to talk about a peace solution. And I think the two-state solution, or the 80% of the world supporting a Palestinian state and recognizing it on the June 4th borders, is a very good basis for negotiations and for bringing that reality to bear, even though, yes, there are a lot of Israelis who are against it. Certainly, the current government is against it, but the current government will not be there forever.
Wang Jin, how do you look at the prospect of a peaceful solution of these long-held issues in this region over this Gaza Strip? And what about the humanitarian crisis there? Are we expecting an imminent relief of the situation there?
We all hope, we all expect that these positive things might happen, but we have to be more clear because what we're talking about, the Israeli-Palestine issue, is not a very easy task to distinguish who is correct and who is wrong, because everybody has their own problems. For example, Israeli, when we're talking about Netanyahu, he's okay. Some people don't like him, but this is the political reality. He is there. He is supported by many of the right wing, and the right wing population inside Israel is reality. They cannot go back to the status about 20 or 30 years ago. This is a political reality. We have to design any plans based on this political reality rather than going back to 100 or maybe half a century ago. Right now, the most challenging and the most pressing issue is how to end the war as early as possible to save as many people in the Gaza Strip. So that is, I think, we should do right now, urgently.
Well, thank you, Wang Jin. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks again to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Jinduo. Thank you for being with us. See you next time.